Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to our next episode, Top Educational Research of 2024 with Josh Ward. We've got him back on back behind the mic, back on the screen.
Thank you for having me.
On the big screen. Hey, before we jump too far in, if you're enjoying the podcast, we'd really appreciate you guys giving us a 5-star review, whatever platform you listen on. Helps us just spread the content and also helps us keep the conversation going. So we'd really appreciate that. Hey, this episode is, we've been doing this long enough that we can repeat kind of ideas, right?
Yep.
We have traditions now.
Yeah.
It's like a family. Who knew?
Second annual.
Yeah, so this is
That's
the top educational research. It's from Edutopia. They put out an article every year that's like the top 10 kind of research based information for education. And so what we're going to do, we'll kind of go through the article. We'll kind of quick hits, right? There's 10 different things that we're going to touch on. We're not going to spend a ton of time on any of them.
I'll be keeping time, yep.
Yep. And is that your role?
No.
Okay.
That's yours.
And you just make sure it gets recorded.
That's right.
So we'll kind of go through, we'll kind of say stuff that is highlights to us or that stuck out and how that maybe applies. And we'll go from there. So,
Okay.
Right. Let's jump in. Right. I guess I'm going to do it. We really should have talked about this a little bit more ahead of time.
No, it's
so the first one is a simple tactic for warm demander. So kind of simplified. This article, they got students were given 10 hard math problems. Some students were given 5 easy problems kind of mixed in. The ones with the easy problems mixed in had more resilience and rated the task as more enjoyable. And then warm demander is having high standards while also being sensitive to student needs. What were your guys' thoughts on that one?
No surprise. I think Zaretta Hammond has done a great job of the warm demander isn't like original to her work. I think it really goes back to like an Alaskan tribal kind of thing, if I did the research right on that before. But
Really?
but she was
Alaskan,
there's like
that's interesting.
Yeah. And so but I think Zaretta Hammond's most famous for most recently getting that idea out. So the warm demander, having those really high expectations for kids, but doing it in a warm relational way. I think everybody we talk about signs of a good relationship, safety, trust, boundaries. And so this research basically is saying that kids felt safe enough and trust and wanted to have the respect for the person that's with them, that they wanted to please them and do well and try their best, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the teachers tend to land in one of those areas more exclusively, whether they're very demanding but kind of skip out on some of those relational pieces, or others that really focus on the relational pieces and try to make things where kids aren't able to grow as much just because they set it up for it to be something where they're feeling successful, but don't really put in those boundaries that help grow.
Yeah, good classroom management. It's the warm demander, right?
Yep.
And I would say someone I think hopefully we'll talk to in the future, but Colin Steele's work with Think Law, if you're not familiar with that, he talks a lot about how we don't set the expectations high enough for kids. We assume they can't do it.
Yep.
So we put the entry level so low.
Yeah.
We set the bar so low for kids, but the warm demander, to connect back to that, would set the bar very high for all kids.
All kids.
And then we make adjustments from there instead of setting it so low.
And I think finding that sweet spot in my perspective of special education, that's where sometimes students that receive special education may fall in that, they're not going to be able to do this, so we're going to just make it easier for them. But it's really not going to play to their ability to grow in those particular areas because you're not reaching that potential because you're not giving them opportunity. So yeah, we see that a lot.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I found myself coming back to a lot during all these in various ways is how are we doing this with our adult teammates, right? Or admin, how are you doing this with your staff? How are you doing this for yourself? If you're just a classroom teacher, how are you sprinkling in positive throughout the course of your really hard? How are you sprinkling in some easy things that you can do to help make us stay motivated and keep us kind of moving in the right direction? So it goes beyond even just students. I think it goes for all of us, and it's something important to think about.
I love that you mentioned looking at it from an administrative lens, because I think That's so
somebody
true.
had to. Katie.
Yeah, I know. And thank goodness it's you. Is it because I'm the warm demander for you?
I don't know.
Keeping those expectations really, really high in your building, but then also having the strong relational practices. And that's really when we talk about building trauma-informed care and being consistent, it's having those consistent expectations from everybody and not wavering with them or expecting less from people, that we really hold that bar to the expectation of what is right and research-based and what's good for kids. So.
All right, next article. Am I summarizing all these? Is that how this is
Yeah,
going to
go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Winning the battle for student attention was the second one. Basically, this study had some students intentionally act bored during a lecture or disinterested. So they weren't necessarily being disruptive, but they were just acting bored and disinterested. And what they found was that the people directly around them did worse than those sitting further away from them. Basically, it spread, right? So if I'm disinterested, like people next to me took fewer notes, and they did worse on exams or on follow-up assessments. Thoughts?
No surprise.
Yeah.
We talked about mirror neurons, brains that fire together, wire together, fire together, whatever it is. But same idea. I'm getting this backwards, but same idea. Mirror neuron effect. This is no surprise that disengagement is contagious. And I would say if you ever go out with a group of friends or with the energy or like in a staff meeting, the energy feels right sometimes. And you're like, that was really good. I don't know why. It just felt good. It's because the whole idea of the mirror neuron effect and the energy of the vibe of the room was good. And like we say, one bad apple kind of ruins the cart, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to hook and reach every single person.
Right. Which is tough. I mean, for teachers, I think one of the things the article talks about too is like, well, how do we try to mitigate those inattentiveness from students spreading, hanging on to those really engaging lessons, making sure and it acknowledges it in the article, not every lesson is it's going to be boring sometimes. That's just the way it is. It's not for everyone, but for some people it's going to be boring at times. So what are some ways you can try to reduce that and get those students engaged so it doesn't spread like that? And they talked about classroom management, which we talked about for the first article too, is just setting up those expectations and those classroom norms so they feel a part of it, they feel connected to the classroom, but also maybe placement of where students sit. That's also a good one too, right? So, which, can be difficult because if they have inattentiveness, maybe they need to be closer to the point of instruction, but also be mindful of the people that are around them as well too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about this a lot this upcoming year with the science reading implications about sitting for these really long periods of lessons, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a lot of more direct instruction, which ties back to John Hattie's work, which is one of the key success factors, more teacher time.
Yep.
That he actually says the small group differentiated instructions aren't as impactful as direct instruction from a teacher.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend a lot of time problem solving how we keep
What does that look like? Yeah.
regulation of students, students' intention, putting some things, transition times into class that we're sitting in a lot of different places, and we're doing things in a lot of different formats so that we can hold students' attention.
Is it developmentally appropriate for a 8-year-old to sit for a 20-minute lesson?
Yeah.
Even though it's on a carpet time or at the circle?
Yeah.
No, probably not.
We're to break it up and chunk it,
Yeah, so it's, can a typical student be able to pay attention for, whatever length of the instruction is, and be mindful of, maybe having to put in some breaks or something to chunk it so students are able to attend to it.
Yeah, I think that's all good stuff, right? I always think like, well, okay, so then how can we use this to our advantage? Katie, you've already kind of referenced it, but like culture and climate in a building can also be impacted in this way with the adults. But I think how can you work the opposite side of this? Because you're right, mirror neurons, people impact other people, and so you might have to be intentional about being like, hey, let's keep this kid engaged. Let's keep this staff member around more positive people. It's how can we pair them up with somebody that is perpetually positive and working really hard to do a lot of good positive things. I think there's just things we can do. So don't forget that you can also use it to your advantage in kind of the opposite direction as well.
Yeah.
if you're intentional about it. You got to be intentional about it. All right, third article, I believe, AI vaporizes long-term learning. So people with access, so they did these assessments, people had access, some students had access to artificial intelligence over just notes, and they initially scored significantly better on quizzes, but then later scored worse on follow-up closed book assessments, which I kind of felt like was maybe a real obvious study, but maybe not. So basically they did well, like really well early on when they had access to artificial intelligence, but then later if they didn't have access to it, they couldn't recall the very same things that other people were able to recall when they had just notes. Thoughts on that?
I was excited for this one to come out.
Yeah. One of the fascinating things too is like, I've kind of dipped my toe just for my job in how to use AI, whether it's throwing in an email to make it sound more professional or to adjust to a certain tone, or maybe coming up with a formula for a spreadsheet. But having these chat bots, it never really occurred to me, especially at the secondary and higher level education, is learning from, hey, I don't know how to do this math problem. Where's a good way to get started on it? So that was completely new to me as I was reading this. But it does make sense that, yes, they're going to be able to work through that problem in the moment, but is it a skill that they're going to learn, that they're going to be able to carry over? It appears that that's not the case, and it makes sense. It's almost like it's assisting them with the problem in the moment, but then once that assistance is gone, it's not a skill that they've learned.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of, and I won't know it right off the top of my head, but there's a lot of science I know behind the idea of like what you write yourself to and how that translates into learning.
Motor memory.
Yep. Like there's a lot of connection there. And so I think if you're just simply typing something in and then getting that like thrown back at you at a screen, there's going to be less connections, fewer connections made within your brain about that for like long term. Whereas if you're actually taking the notes, I think it's going to be something that's a little stickier, I guess.
Yeah, I think we have talked this a lot about in our building about being intentional about, since COVID, everything was on the computer. And we've used a lot of these programs that are AI generated to help assist or scaffold or substitute some teaching time. And I think from the previous article, or what we're learning about science of reading, is that direct instruction from the teacher is most beneficial, that AI cannot duplicate that.
Oh, absolutely.
And that doing everything on the computer, there's lots of harmful effects of screen times and over compensating for things on the computer. So I'm excited for this article to come out and basically be like, we need to get kids off the computer, do more engaging, hands-on, project-based learning things that are collaborative learning experiences, that technology is a tool, but does not replace good instruction. So it can't be the full support. It's no different than using a calculator all the time, right?
Yeah. Do you see benefit in using something like this though at all, or is it like no, we should I think it's, as far as learning, independent learning or studying,
I think it's a caution as a tool. It is not replace instruction from anybody, and I think sometimes we overcompensate using the tools instead of going back to what we know is best practice.
And that's a sticky situation. Yeah, especially if not to, we all went to college and know that sometimes you're in a grind, and sometimes
you guys went to college.
Yeah.
Wow. Did I need to go to college?
That's on my resume. So. I did go to college, but like sometimes you're trying to be more efficient than actually meaningful about the learning process. So I could see where people can start using it as a crutch, just to get assignments done. And they talk a lot about the more higher learning in college with this article. But making sure, like you pointed out, it's not a crutch. We're not going to fall back on it. That the instruction is what's important, and we're not going to replace teachers with this.
Yeah, and what we know specifically about math, as the article references, is that you have to actually understand the foundational understanding of numbers and the why and the whole thinking. So the algorithm that the computer's teaching you doesn't really matter.
Yep.
Because if you don't foundationally understand the concept of numbers and how why this problem's going to work out the way it did, then it doesn't really matter. No. Just pull out the calculator.
I will say I took a calculus class in college, and I learned everything right before the test to pass the test. the next day had no idea how to solve,
Yeah.
different problems. Just enough to get it in there, and then it was gone.
Yeah.
So.
You would have been unstoppable if you had artificial
I know.
intelligence back then.
I know.
Like, who knows what you could have accomplished? I think that I agree with everything you guys said. Hey, if you haven't started like delving into AI though yourself, like you really should. If you're an educator, you should start playing around with it just so you can understand, because people are using it. Kids are using it. It's not going away. That's my just general plug.
Yeah.
Start figuring it out. Even if you're like, I'll never use AI in my room, like that's fine. But the kids are, and you should at least kind of understand.
Silly
it.
not to. It cuts your planning time.
Yeah,
it
well,
helps
there's a lot
you.
of benefits for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, next article. I think number 4. I don't know.
Yep.
I didn't number them.
You got
Take your protobiologists and poets outside. So we're taking students outside less basically than what we used to. It says, and it's bad. It's bad. That's the summary of this article. It's a bad trend. We should take kids outside. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, duh, right? I
we
think,
say that, but it's not happening,
No, it's not
right?
happening.
We've crammed all this instruction onto the computer. The kids are sitting in their seat for hours on end. Yeah.
Well, maybe you could have AI make a picture of outside that they can look at.
That's true.
And then they could just they could take a look at that. I think, for me, I was gonna, Katie, give you some props as well as the staff that we work with at our school. I try not to talk about our school a whole lot, or the staff there in general, just try to stay out of that. But they do a really, really good job about getting kids outside and having space to do that. We're kind of lucky. We have a space in general, like we have enough space where kids can go outside, and helping them learn in a hands-on way. There are plenty of teachers that I work with that all of a sudden we're going outside to do like a nature journal, or we're going outside to like actually observe this thing in the meadow space that we've created, or we're going outside to. So they do a really great job of that, and it's impactful. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, they at our primary buildings, they've added a nature class as one of the integrated arts. So every 5 days, they're going outside, whether it's 15 degrees or whether it's 100 degrees. They're going to go outside, whether it's raining. Doesn't matter.
Kids are dropping like flies.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
yeah.
You know what? This is what we do.
And my daughter participates in that program, and we always get messages that say like, hey, make sure they have boots because we're going to be going outside, and it's been raining for a week. And she loves it, absolutely loves it, and what a good learning experience.
Yeah, I think we talked when Dr. Julie Biddle was on here. Dr. Biddle and I both have a strong background in Reggio Emilia education, which is very much a nature-based education program. Everything we know about regulation, and there's so much going out besides just talking about taking kids outside, but we talk about like the art of grounding and barefoot and balanced, right? Having kids outside, playing and exploring, seeing natural materials, seeing things. It is wild to me that it's not mandated time. I hope education catches up at some point to realize that we need to have kids. Humans are made and designed to be outside and have fresh air and be around things and experience. It's the best way for mental health and regulation, and so much science behind that. And if your school does not have a nature space, when I came onto our school, we did not have a nature space. We were kind of like neighborhood landlocked. We intentionally put in a meadow space. So we had time and space to go outside and be outside in nature because we knew the strong benefits of having kids have real life experiences. Yeah. It was crazy when we first opened it. Like, kids didn't know how to be around bugs. Yeah, it was like wild. We're like, there are bugs outside. They didn't know. I mean, it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely going to learn more from experiencing than you are from reading a textbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Or watching a video. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Hey, number 5, learning to love academic mistakes. So talking about mistakes, and especially working on mistakes with students, improves student performance and lessens the amount of reteach time for teachers as well. I don't know how well I summarized that article, but thoughts?
Yeah.
Things I missed?
I would say it's a whole idea. I can't express this enough, but it's progress over perfection, right? So we want kids to go through the process of learning, that mistakes are part of that process. And really, the end product is really not as important as the process, and that that's really how our classroom should be designed. We should be working through like rubric-based learning and not this finality of a grade for perfection, because we should be working through and problem-solving those errors.
And one of the things that I do recall, like in that article, that stuck out to me is like it's not as impactful just to have a teacher of anybody of any age just standing up and telling you that it's okay to make mistakes and then explaining why it's okay to make mistakes. It's actually the impact came in a teacher coming alongside of the students while like in the midst of making the mistake and helping come up with a solution together. Again, it's very like collaborative. And I thought that was important as well. So I thought we were good, a good handful of years ago about teaching kids that it was okay to make mistakes.
Right.
But that's different. I mean, not bad. It's not bad, but that's different than being alongside them as they make the mistakes and then working through it together.
Yeah. I think, and that's important when we look at formative assessments and how important that data can be, because then you can look and say, specific students, what are the areas that we can work on? And let's look back at this math problem and see where it went wrong. That's going to be a bigger impact than just getting a grade back that says you missed these questions. Redo them for half credit on these and then turn it in, you'll improve your grade. But those formative assessments should then drive how we interact with students to correct those mistakes or to talk about those mistakes. And sometimes it's looking at problems as a whole class. This article compares the two, whether we're talking to the whole class and looking at some common mistakes, which there was benefit to, but then also, as Justin pointed out, sitting down, having some time with individual students or a small group of students and looking specifically where those mistakes were, and then having that impact moving forward. So it's great.
All right, number 6, is that where I'm at?
Yep.
All right, this is your brain on peer pressure. Brain scans show that students teaching a classmate while leading to increased levels of anxiety, even though so higher anxiety because they have to teach a classmate something that they learned, but it actually had greater levels of brain activity across the board than students who were just either teaching themselves or revisiting a lesson individually. So thoughts on that?
Well, it seemed a little counterintuitive to what you think when we talk about being regulated or having to be regulated before you educate, right? And learning. Yeah. So having that bit of anxiety, though, is, from what I gathered, a kind of a motivating factor to be more thoughtful when you're working through this process with peers or having somebody teach you. So using that kind of as, but really they're talking about brain science too, and how active the brain is. So it was kind of interesting. I think if you would have told me the premise of the article, I may have thought it would have gone a different way.
Yeah.
So. I would say it goes back to that healthy dose of good stress, how we remove, a lot of times we avoid kids going through any stress. And so when they're approached with a stressful situation, they don't even know how to cope or deal. So this is like that idea of that healthy stress that's good for your brain. So I'm not surprised by this, and I would say this also leans back into that process-oriented universal design for learning, where kids are actually having different avenues to design projects and have that idea of presenting in front of peers or sharing a product, which we don't allow enough of, because a lot of times it's that summative test is what we're doing, or we're all doing this one paper and we're just turning it in. That if we can get to that universal design idea of in that process-oriented work, then you're setting yourself up to allow this to happen all the time, and then there's huge brain impacts for it.
Yeah, I know I am kind of a broken record. Actually, I remember last year when we did this episode, I was a broken record as well in a different way, about talking about how far we swing one way or the other on things. I kept bringing that up. This time I keep bringing up adults, right? So this applies to adults too. Like, how can we use this to increase our own engagement as educators and just humans? Like, what are we doing to not just be isolated and on our own? Because really, that's almost, I'd be curious to look at the actual study more, because that's almost my question. Is in 2 of those situations, right? You were teaching, students were either reteaching themselves, like going over the stuff, or they were revisiting the lesson and rewatching the lesson. The third option was you're actually with another person. And I wonder how much just the human connection side of things also increases the amount of your brain that, how much brain activity you've got going and how many different parts are firing because you're actually with another person.
Yeah.
Instead of doing something more individual. And I think that makes a big difference. So again, we're not really made to operate on islands. And I think that even though it can be anxiety producing in various ways, I think it's an important thing for us to remember that we are meant to be ultimately, or we're very wired to be collaborative and relational kind of beings. So I think that's an important thing that I took away from that. Okay, COVID's long tail. People continue to see student deficits potentially because of COVID longer than what they thought. Thoughts?
I think I'm sure the cultural significance years from now when our kids have kids, right? Mm-hmm. That we're going to look back and say that was the era of COVID and the impacts it's had on family structures and early childhood education. I think we see a lot of the impacts with young children. I think the article talks about this, because they had lack of preschool experiences and that sense of community going through, and we haven't really done anything to correct it. We kind of we'll just go back to normal, but we can't ever go back. I mean, the influences of technology and the availability of that, it
was a spike, right? There was a spike right there because there had to be a spike in how much we use technology. I mean, obviously it's not like we weren't using technology, but there was a forced spike in that. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know that we pulled back from that really, which goes back to one of the earlier articles we were talking about in our conversation there. Yeah. But yeah, I do think it's interesting. I actually, in a very small sample size of right around our area, and maybe even just our school, I don't know. But we've heard a lot of positive things this year that I think seemed more typical and normal. So maybe we're just a real exception in that scenario. Not that we have it all together. I don't want to paint that picture, but especially I think in the world of maybe behavior, I feel like we've seen kind of an upswing in moving the right direction. That's not saying that's across the board, and it's certainly not what this article is talking about. But I do think it's an interesting article. And I always wonder, we have an episode on epigenetics. I always wonder, down the road, in that world, what kind of impact do kids have that are just now being born, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. But to people that lived through the pandemic. And then what will... even kids now, when they get older and have kids, how will my kids be impacted by COVID because of the epigenetic kind of response? Or will they? I don't know. I'm not that much of a scientist, but it's interesting.
One thing it talked about too, the study, they were talking about kindergarten and first graders and having, lower skills and fine motor, communicating needs, things like that. But this study was done in 24. So those would be students that weren't necessarily in school during COVID, which makes it interesting. But one of the one of the factors that they bring up is the chronic absenteeism. Yeah. And this is just my own philosophy that I've thought about, is during COVID and after, or during the 2021, it was always, if you're sick, you're staying home. Yeah. No matter what, right. And don't send your kids, just take time, make sure you're getting yourself back together, then come back. And I think that mindset is shifting a little bit because it went too far, right? Where we weren't sending, now they're missing loads and loads of school, critical instruction, especially at that young age. So obviously if your kid's really sick, don't have them come to school. But just because they're feeling uncomfortable or
they have the sniffles.
Yeah, they have the sniffles, right? Get them in school. That's a big factor too, especially at that young age. I mean, at all ages, but when this article references those skills that are needed. I mean, the amount of work that our OT does at our primary buildings, because of the teachers' comparison to pre-pandemic, those skills that were coming in are not there anymore. Yeah. And how much they're having to intervene.
Well, I think every kid has a tablet now, and so we're drawing on a tablet. Yeah. We're doing sensory type painting or games and stuff. And pre-pandemic, it wasn't a one-on-one device scenario for a lot of kids. And I do think that has been a crutch for parents because it's easy. I think Josh and I have the youngest. You have the youngest kids out of us. Yeah. It's just easy because now everybody has technology. When you're out doing stuff, you don't have to clean up the mess. It's just all on one thing.
Kids aren't fighting.
Right. Yeah. But unfortunately, what has happened, we're not getting out. We're doing Play-Doh today, or we're coloring.
There's so much.
We're finger painting, all the things that are so incredibly messy. Yeah, I don't know how you do it, man. I don't know how you do it. But all of those things, if you're not setting up like a maker space in your house, which I encourage people to do if you have some type of space or a cart, get your kids early childhood education. They should be drawing, cutting, coloring, painting, all the messy experimental things.
Yeah.
That's how they create representations of the world around them, and they are starting to figure out who they are. And we've kind of taken that part out, and so now they have no fine motor skills and are still problem solving and negotiating their environment. So
Yeah.
Great points.
yeah.
All right, number 9, a modest mental health turnaround. So feelings of hope and despair dropped in teenagers from 42% down to 40% this year. First significant downturn in years. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's not that big of a significant turnaround, so I just want to acknowledge that. But it is positive markings that's saying that I think there's been a lot of prioritization of SEL work, and then with the ESSER funds, we obviously provided more counselors, as the article we talked to, in mental health services. I just hope that since the ESSER funds are gone now, and we're not giving the schools extra funding, that the priority of providing mental health services, as we talk about MTSS, SEL and behavior are 2 parts of that, and part of that is mental health services to go along with that in prioritizing those needs. So, interested.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they probably stuff will get pulled, especially like districts have a limited amount of money anyway, right? School districts are always kind of on the hook for trying to save money when they can. My guess, and this is purely based off nothing, just what I would guess, is that some of those services will go away and get pulled. And then what districts will find and what schools will find is that actually they were incredibly important, and they'll have to start trying to find ways to get them back. I think that part of the importance is realizing that we're just in a different world than we were 50 years ago, right? Like a lot of stuff has changed overall, and I mean stuff always changes, but the ability for teenagers and middle schoolers to have a phone on them that alerts them to the next big thing that's happening in the world, or the awful event that happens in, South Carolina, or some major disaster in Australia, right? Like that can happen for teenagers, for kids, right now, because they have a device that's alerting them to that. And that hasn't been the case. 50 years ago, how many kids were sitting down to read a newspaper to hear about all these things? And instead they were living their lives as kids and teens, doing rambunctious, potentially whatever crazy stuff as kids and teens did. I think it's just different now. And I think what schools, it's why getting trained and having staff trained really well in trauma-informed care and how to just work with students behaviorally and the mental health side of things. Not that they have to be mental health experts, but I think being workable in those ways and having everybody kind of trained in that way is so super important, because we can't, as you've said before in different episodes, we can't rely on one person to come in and just solve everything. It really does take a team, takes a village, which I know is very cliche thing to say, but it's true. And I think that that's an important thing for schools to keep their foot on the pedal about, is training everyone to where we can help out in these other ways, and it's not just teaching content.
And I think what that also does is mitigate some of the cost with getting these other professionals in that we've maybe, I don't want to say luxury, but have had those extra funds allocated for those supports and folks that are coming in to help, extra counselors. But that's something that we can do kind of on the ground floor. We're the ones that are working with the students every day in the classroom. And if those people are there with that training and can support that, that's a really good resource.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to be clear too. Like, I'm not saying like teachers or educators are going to be like the end all
replacement.
Yeah. There's still going to always be students that are going to need a real mental health professional of some sort to step in and help out. But I think the number of students that is going to be smaller if everybody is trained to help out on the front end with like the smaller things to help them not grow into the bigger things. And I think that's the key, because right now I think we can get into the trap of like, well, this isn't my job at all. I just teach math, and so everything else has to go on to somebody else. Well, that could not be the case, and you can actually make a real impact. a real sizable impact in somebody's life by getting trained a little bit more. That's why we do what we do here right now, right? Yep. Is for that very reason.
Yeah, and I wonder too, some of these stats, if it is a lot about the youth feeling connected and having a place at school and being intentional in the classroom to build that community, in the schools to build that community, is something where when students may not be in the best mindset, that they know who to turn to, or they have trusted adults that they can talk to, and it doesn't have to be somebody with, a doctorate or a master's degree.
Yeah. Yep. So no, I think that's good. All right, last one: the science of reading meets real children. So the verdict, ultimately, this was just my takeaway. This isn't even really a summary of the article. Yeah. But I think the verdict is still out on the best way to teach reading. Ultimately, and this goes back to maybe my last year's the drum I was beating last year. My gosh, we're really good at swinging crazy far one way, then swinging crazy far the other way. And I think we're trying to, in education right now, with the science of reading and reading education, like how to actually teach reading in general, we haven't quite found that sweet spot of being like more in the middle. What's the right amounts of each thing to do? I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think we've seen huge impacts for kids that maybe weren't responding to a balanced literacy approach. Mm-hmm. So we've had a very specific niche of kids. My oldest daughter is a great example, was really far behind in reading, had an exceptional teacher her second grade year that did the science of reading well, and she's performing super high in reading now, but really just needed somebody to explicitly teach her some of those concepts and skills. Mm-hmm. I think she's the perfect example of the kid that needed to respond to it. Yeah. However, I don't think the science in reading is meeting the needs of all of our kids, because we do have to teach that core instruction, but I think we've got pockets of kids that are exceptionally gifted and high. How do we meet their needs? And we have kids that are not on those grade level standards who need I think the science of reading has really helped for special education services, right? That direct explicit instruction. I think the verdict definitely is still out if this is really a holistic classroom approach, that we need to abandon the love of literature and read alouds. And I know comprehension's part of that rope, but I think we miss some parts of that. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you. I think when we're doing phonetic-based reading or instruction in the younger grades, they're missing out when you reference the read alouds and those guided reading groups, where they're missing out on the language, they're missing out on vocabulary, they're missing out on being able to talk about books, being able to get engaged with books. And I think that's crucial for long-lasting readers, and especially even in the science of reading, where that big piece is that comprehension, and you can't have that without the language and the vocabulary. So I think it's crucial. Yeah.
Yeah, this is going into my 20th year of teaching reading, because I've taught the younger grades, right, K1. So that teaching reading has always been a huge part of teaching kids how to read. But I do think as we missed the phonics piece so much over the years, that I think hopefully we come to some form of a balance, our true balance, where we are doing that explicit phonic instruction for kids. Yeah, and starting the reading progressions, because I think we missed the reading progression and just went straight for one end of it. So just like we look at math as a progression-based learning, I think we need to look at reading as progression-based learning, and then kind of meet kids where they're at on the next developmental thing that they need to do. And so hopefully we're going to kind of figure that all out. It'll be an interesting year, where I know the state of Ohio, every district is mandated to adopt their new reading curriculum this next year. It's going to shift how we teach kids tremendously. So it'll be interesting.
In the article, it said 38 states have adopted a science of reading bill. Yeah. So
it's a lot of the states.
Here we go.
My estimation would be that's more than half.
That's a good estimate. The science of math has taught you well. Over time. Yeah, I'm always an advocate for not overcorrecting, right? Find the middle ground. And I think there are people that are smart people, hopefully, I'm assuming, that know a lot more about reading than I do, that are on it. My hope is just that people don't get too panicky and overcorrect. That's always the fear. Don't panic and overcorrect. Find the middle ground, make good, solid decisions. All right, that's the 10 articles. We did it. Believe it or not, you've come to the end. Yeah. What do you guys want people to walk away knowing? Josh, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
You ready?
I
Okay.
would love to start. Yeah. So I think for me, even looking at last year's podcast that we did on the same article, is there's some things that are still relevant in a year's time, but also some other things that there's always going to be something new. There's always going to, whether it's the science of reading or how to support SEL, AI. What is AI going to look like in 5 years? When we do this in 5 years, they're going to have an article in here about AI, and it's going to be something that we can't even fathom right now in 2024. So it's so important. And Katie, I appreciate you bringing this to us and also the masses that are listening, just about how important, how much research is going on, and there's just so much involved with educating and creating adults with all of these skills that it's just important to see where things go and how trends go, but making sure that you're constantly looking at these articles and these studies, just so to keep fresh and to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put education's changing, so I agree with Josh. It's important to keep up with the research if you're as an educator, but don't lose sight that great teachers are masters in the art of teaching. As much as we talk a lot about the science, there's a definite art in teaching, and about how we teach and how we make others feel is really the heart of being a good educator.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I was just thinking, just be a continual learner, right? Along the same lines of what both you guys said, it's hard to find time to do it for sure. We all three of us know that, but keep learning things. And I would also encourage you to keep learning things that don't have to do with education. I'll draw my beat also all the time. And then delve into your hobbies and your interests that you have outside of work that don't have anything to do with education. And then find ways to incorporate those things that you're already interested in into what you do at school with students. Whether they are kindergartners or whether they're seniors, they like that.
Yep.
Students like hearing about the stuff you're interested in, that you're passionate about, and the ways that you work that into whatever classes you are teaching. So do that. You're always better off having a well-rounded adult as a teacher than someone who is just all education all the time. So do your best to be that well-rounded adult that kids get to have as one of their teachers, and that's what they're going to remember, right? That and what kind of person you were to them. So thank you guys as always for listening. Hopefully it was a helpful episode. Hopefully it makes you interested in reading some of these articles.
I would encourage, take a look at it.
Yeah, jumping more into some of them if there's one that particularly interests you. Learn a little bit more about it, and I don't know, just pass that on to somebody else. If this is something that, if you're an admin out there, and you're thinking, oh, what can we do for professional development, what can we do for staff meetings? Maybe you go through these over the course of the rest of this year.
We did it this past year, and it was kind of a light, fun, heartfelt way to kind of just really hit some kind of key topics to go over some research. So it was an easy way to plan. It's kind of very set up for you. Yeah. So it's a great idea, a great way to be able to utilize that. Maybe if you're not an administrator and you're like, this would be a good idea, but it's way better than talking about how many people will be allowed at the Christmas party for each room. That doesn't need to happen at a staff meeting. Maybe you pass this on to your administrator and offer it as an idea. However you use it, we hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that you, again, like it, share it, leave us a review. Those things are always super helpful. And let's go out there and do the work. Let's go do it. Let's do it. Hey everybody, let's keep the conversation going. Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.